The work of hand weeding and thinning almost seems as if it never will end on Astarte Farm, and Sadie, Kelsey, and Sammy persevere in these seemingly endless tasks. But the end is in sight as we round the big corner of the fall equinox and head into that time of year when the nights grow longer and the days grow noticeably shorter. The oat and pea cover crop that Amelia sowed at the end of August has begun to show strong growth just 3 weeks after seeding. The two crops are keeping pace with each other in these shots, and at the end of this video you will see what they look like after 2 more weeks of growth. By the time we get killing frosts, the peas will have overtopped the oats and may need to get pitchforked out of the paths and back onto the bed tops where their contribution of nitrogen will be the most beneficial. The round bed behind the high tunnel shows a similar pattern of oats and peas, but without any designated paths, we can let the peas sprawl and just produce a dense mulch to protect the soil over winter. Down in field number 2, Ellen has planted a buckwheat cover crop thickly enough to qualify as a smother crop. The buckwheat's broad leaves will quickly canopy these 4 beds that are still recovering from a grass invasion in last year's eggplant. We will need to mow the buckwheat as soon as it flowers to prevent it from reseeding in the spring, but even a touch of frost on this tender crop may do the job of terminating it on a single cold night. The beds that the crew was thinning in the opening shot: beets on the right, carrots in the middle, and Daikon radish on the left. You can see the relative effectiveness of the cardboard and wood chip paths in this area. Beyond the Daikon is one of the winter squash patches that has already been harvested. Just beyond that is a block of Daikon that has been planted in tight rows as a cover crop. The Daikon's long tap roots pull up minerals from deep within the soil, and its thick leaves quickly form a blanket above the bed. When the plant dies over the course of the winter, the roots disintegrate into conical holes of nutrient-dense mush, while the leaves mulch the soil surface and yet almost disappear by spring planting. Here are 2 beds of fall carrots with some of the remaining grass paths on the farm. The great advantage of having those living grass roots continuously in the soil is often outweighed by the aggravation of grass intrusion into the beds and the expense of constant mowing. Between the carrots and the wildflower bed you can see an experiment in using one of our occultation strips as a semi-permanent bed-top mulch for lettuce. We have had such a wet year out here in western Massachusetts that bottom rot has been a serious hindrance in our lettuce harvests. The woven ground cloth will keep the lower leaves from touching the soil and will certainly provide excellent weed control. Here's a shot of some lettuce that was growing on the straw mulch left over from this year's garlic crop. The straw has done a pretty good job of keeping the lettuce leaves off the soil and prevented quite a good deal of the bottom rot. In this area you can also see the remnants of the wood chip and cardboard paths in what was one of this year's winter squash patches. The green haze on the beds is mustard being grown as a cover crop. We ran into a serious problem in our squash this year with a soil-borne disease called phytophthora that causes the vines and fruit to rot. One of the biggest problems with this disease is that it has the potential to create spores which can persist in the soil for decades. We plan to use the mustard cover crop as a biofumigant by flail mowing it as late as we can in the season. If we quickly cover the chopped up crop with silage tarps, we hope to trap the gaseous emissions from the decomposing mustard and kill off any spores. If we have been careful enough in removing all the infected plant material, and if we are able to get a hefty amount of mustard biomass grown before the real cold sets in, we should be able to begin beating this disease back. In all likelihood, we will be using mustard as part of our cover crop rotation for some years to come until we see how effective this strategy can be. Here's another shot of lettuce and Swiss chard growing on the old straw-mulched garlic beds. You can see the occultation strips that are being used to control the path weeds in this section, and also the movable overhead sprinklers that have proved so helpful during any brief dry spells this year. Down at the far end of the field, the fall and winter spinach has begun to germinate. Depending on how the weather breaks for us this fall, we will either have a few good pickings of this spinach, or we will have to wait patiently for the first few warm weeks of early spring to harvest them after overwintering. And lastly, here is a shot of the oats and peas that are Amelia's first seeding of a cover crop. The lush growth has begun to canopy even over the pathways. While the cover crop is scheduled to be terminated by flail mowing before the garlic gets planted, you can clearly see the potential for growing mulch in place with winter-killed cover crops. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe and like.